Mr. Vice President, Your Excellencies, my Lords, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Imperial College London. I'm so pleased that we are joined by so many friends and colleagues this afternoon. I want to begin by paying tribute to the people here today who have dedicated their lives to fighting cancer, researching new treatments and techniques, and offering the highest quality of care possible. Thank you for your leadership, all that you have done and all that you are doing. Now it's my great pleasure and privilege to introduce the 47th Vice President of the United States, Mr. Joe Biden. Mr. Vice President, I am yet to finish, sir. You can see the reaction, Vice President. It's a great honor to have you here to deliver the inaugural lecture for the Cancer Research UK Imperial Centre. Joe Biden has had a most remarkable political career. He became a senator while in his 20s and served for 36 years. He led the fight against gun violence and violence against women. And in 2008, he became the Democratic nominee for Vice President. During Vice President Biden's time in office, he represented the United States all over the world and helped improve lives of ordinary families at home. He entered office at the time of crises and left America and the world in a better place when his term came to an end. That is the true measure of leadership. The past 2 years have only served to remind us all on how much leadership matters to the United States and to the world. And Vice President Biden has brought his extraordinary leadership to the fight against cancer too. Mr. President, you and Jill have spoken so movingly about the tragic loss of your son, Beau, the age of 46, in 2015. Your personal story has touched us all. Beau, like his father, led an extraordinary life of service to his country. Like all too many, his life was cut short while he was in his prime. A devastating loss to his community and country, but above all, to those that he loved and those that loved him. There is no better example of turning a private grief to public good than the Biden Cancer Initiative. Mr. Vice President, you've joined the fight against cancer in the United States and around the world, and we are so glad in this room that you have now become part of this team. As Vice President, Joe Biden worked with President Obama on the Cancer Moonshot, securing an additional $1.8 billion for cancer research over 7 years. The Cancer Moonshot exists to accelerate cancer research and make more therapies available to more patients, while also improving the prevention and early detection of cancer. And in the Biden Cancer Initiative, founded last year, aims to continue the fight by strengthening collaboration. Here at Imperial College, we bring together researchers from a range of distinct disciplines to create the innovations that can transform patient care. This is exemplified by the Cancer Research UK Imperial Centre. We are working across many different areas, but let me give you a couple of examples on how difference the collaboration makes. First, we have partnered with Optimam, which is a spin-out from Cancer Research UK, the National Health Service, and DeepMind to apply artificial intelligence to mammographic screening. We're discovering new ways of reducing false positive rates and eliminating unnecessary treatments. Second, our scientists, engineers, and clinicians are working together to create novel surgical tools to improve cancer treatment. The iKnife allows a surgeon to detect tumor margins in real time, reducing the need for further operations. I would like to pay tribute to the many people involved in these important advances. As we are further expanding the potential of our convergent science through a unique partnership with the Institute of Cancer Research in Fulham Road, not that far away from us. The Institute provides an unparalleled opportunity for interactions between the world-class engineering and physical scientists at Imperial and an institution that is solely dedicated to beating cancer. In these divided times, the fight against cancer unites us all. Early diagnosis and effective treatment aren't equally available to all. But no one is exempt from getting cancer. But it is the fight against cancer that brings out the best in people. It's the arena of extraordinary scientific accomplishment. It is where we can achieve so much more working together than apart. We are one global team in the fight against cancer. And it is a great pleasure to welcome you, Mr. Vice President, as the global leader of that team. A few weeks ago, Vice President Biden and Dr. Jill Biden convened the Biden Cancer Summit. Leaders gathered together in Washington, D.C., but also in communities across America. More than 450 community summits took place across the United States, in places where people live, in places where people work, in schools and in colleges, but also in halls of worship. It showed the power of bringing people together to focus the national attention on what can be done against cancer. Now, before I hand over to Vice President Biden, let's see a short video of what happened on that day.
Today, we celebrate the survivors and the caregivers, the doctors, the nurses, the researchers, the scientists. We're not here just to talk. We're here to act. We've reached an inflection point in this fight against cancer.
We are all searching for answers because we dare to believe that together we will beat this.
All of us will be touched by cancer, but each of us has the power to create change.
My primary care physician looked at me and said, "Jackie, it'll be a miracle if you survive another 5 years." At that moment, I knew I had to mobilize.
Communities are stepping up to address whatever issues are important in that community.
If we never spent another dime on finding new cures, we could still save thousands more lives by doing one thing, sharing the knowledge that already exists.
We're honored to fulfill our commitment to share data in the service of our patients.
We're announcing the expansion of open homes to include medical stays.
It's about vertical and horizontal integration of data that will enable new innovation, new science.
We're conducting cancer research on over a dozen cancer types.
We, the Cancer Moonshot, went from a goal to a national, international movement.
Together, we are stronger. We are fiercer. We are more powerful than this disease.
I am absolutely convinced, beyond any shadow of a doubt, we can make hope real. This is the mission of our life.
Can make hope real. And as President Barack Obama once said, yes, we can. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming the 47th Vice President of the United States, Joe Biden, to the stage.
Thank you very much, Lord Darcy. It's an honor to be here before so many distinguished people. Lord Darcy, you have, as I was saying to you in the whole room before we came in, I think something is changing, having nothing to do with me or any individual. But there's a sense, an urgency of now that is, I think, become real over the last several years. There's so much possibility that exists, and I became introduced to this entire field because of the loss of our son. But I don't want anyone to think that our loss is any different than the loss of the 6-8 million people out there who've died of cancer. Raise your hand if you have anyone who's close to you or you who have suffered cancer or died. Raise your hand. I don't have to explain a thing to you. Every single audience I speak to around the world, almost the same percentage, almost everyone raises their hand. And Lord Darcy, your reorganization of your health ministry here has, it's impressive what you're doing. And President Gast, thank you for welcoming me and allowing me to be here. President Gast and I know each other from her days when she was president at Lehigh University. And I spoke up there, and I was telling Lord Darcy, my great-grandfather, who was the first Irish Catholic ever to be elected to the state senate in the state of Pennsylvania when you didn't go to college very often, graduated in 1869 from Lehigh. And had I known that when I was playing football at the University of Delaware, we would not have beaten them so badly. I would have. Folks, look, a lot of people this morning got up, put one foot in front of the other, facing dilemmas that you have faced and I have faced in the loss of my son, without anywhere near the help or support that I have had. There's an awful lot of heroes walking around London today, around the United States, around the world, who are just get up and keep moving and keep hoping. And 2.5 years ago, I stood in Davos, Switzerland, just a few weeks after President Obama announced that I would head up the Cancer Moonshot, which came as a consequence of my deciding, when I decided not to run for president and seek the nomination. I walked out into the Rose Garden with the president, and spontaneously, it wasn't part of my written remarks, I said, my one regret, because knew the press would ask me, do I have any regrets? I said, my one regret is that I wasn't going to be the president who could preside over the end of cancer as we know it. Because I think within the next 8 years, we have a possibility of making phenomenal changes. And so I was invited to speak after the president in the State of the Union message, by the way, without telling me he was going to put me in charge of the moonshot. He always enjoyed that. If you ever watched the President Obama's State of the Union, he always would save one moment to turn and say, and Joe will do it, whatever it was. He never would tell me. He liked to see the reaction on my face, but you think I'm kidding, I'm not. But I was scheduled to deliver a keynote address to the World Economic Forum on one of the most difficult topics I ever had to speak to, and worked so hard to prepare, and it was not at all certain I was correct. And that was mastering the fourth industrial revolution. Will there be a middle class 20 years from now? And just a few weeks ahead of that event, when I was asked by the foundation to put together a round table on cancer. And in short notice, we brought together some of the leaders in the world on cancer research and treatment. Many areas of expertise were represented, from biologists to clinicians to to technologies and from biochemistry and engineering, a whole range of expertise. And it was there that the work of the Cancer Moonshot truly began, with international focus and international audience. And as a consequence of that, I was honored today to be asked to share with you some of the progress that we made in the United States with the Cancer Moonshot and the Biden Cancer Initiative. Today, there are approximately, as I'm not telling you anything you don't know, 14 million new cancer cases each year and 8.2 million cancer-related deaths worldwide per year. By 2025, if the status quo remains, there will be almost 20 million new cancer cases per year, and 11.4 million more people will die in that year alone. We know that cancer uses every tool at its disposal. It hides in the immune system, it builds its own blood supply, it uses viruses to spread, it engineers a friendly cellular environment to support its survival and growth. And it knows how to spread through the body using pathways and mutations that we don't fully understand today. And cancer never gives up. It never surrenders. Cancer's only focus is to bring down the patient. And cancer is not distracted by tenure or by publication pressures or patents or profits. That's why it seems to me we have to use all the expertise we have working together to take down this disease. And I think we're starting to do so. I traveled my country and the world visiting patients and doctors in cancer centers and hospitals from Australia to the Middle East, talking before literally tens of thousands of researchers, one group made up of 19,000 cancer researchers, patients, clinicians, immunologists, talking with hundreds of advocates to learn what is most needed in this fight, to double the progress. The goal we set in the Moonshot was to double our progress, to do in the next 5 years what ordinarily would take 10 years, and bring some real hope to patients and their families. And all of you know that what cancer patients desperately, desperately, desperately plead for is just a little hope, just a little bit of hope. That's what keeps them going. That's what they cling to. Above all else, I've learned that there was and is reason for hope. And that's because science and technology have reached what I refer to as an inflection point. I didn't realize till I started to thoroughly, and had the federal government at my disposal, thoroughly investigate this issue. I didn't realize that up until 5 years before my son was diagnosed, immunotherapy was basically viewed by all of you as a voodoo science. It wasn't in the deal at all. Clinicians understood more about this disease and how to attack it than ever before, but it wasn't because that the progress had been steady. And oncologists are routinely working closely now with immunologists, virologists, geneticists, chemical and biological engineers, and others in ways that didn't even happen just 6 years ago. And there's no better example than what's happening now with immunotherapy around the world. Just last week, the Nobel Prize went to an acquaintance of mine, Jim Allison from MD Anderson, who was part of my son Bo's medical team, and Ta-Soo Hanjo for their work on immunotherapies based on checkpoint inhibitors. The Cancer Moonshot was focused on two main goals. One, to inject the urgency of now into the fight and double the rate of progress, as I said, to do in 5 years what would ordinarily take 10. And two, to be very blunt about it, I hope you're not offended, but to change the culture, and come up with new strategies for this fight, not the strategies for the last fight. You know, when Nixon in the United States declared the war on cancer, he meant what he said, but he had no army. He had no tools. We're in a situation where cancer research and care system was set up There was little, if any, sharing of data by hospitals or the capacity to do it, or researchers, little ability to share. It didn't exist. But so much has happened in the last 50 years. And so we have to update our strategy, in my view, for the 21st century. One that is interconnected, that we could, more interconnected than we've ever imagined. You know, when we had our Cancer Moonshot Summit in 2016, 400 people attended the event at Howard University in Washington, D.C., but 7,000 people joined us in nearly 300 individual summits that held in every state, Puerto Rico, and Guam. At that moment, I believe the Moonshot turned from evolved from a program into a movement. Not because of us, but we were part of that. Because of that movement, we're able now to identify and grow new approaches to data sharing, clinical trials, access to care, prevention programs. You know, we announced at the summit and throughout 2016 as part of the Moonshot, there were nearly 80 new actions and collaborations that, from approximately 80 private sector companies and organizations, along with the federal government. To mention just a few, drug companies are currently testing hundreds of new promising targeted drugs in early research stages. All of you knew and figured out early on that the way to deal with AIDS was not a single drug. You figured it out, and there were multiple drugs. Well, a lot of you bright young folks out there decided that why doesn't that work the same way with cancer? Well, researchers wanting to use compounds and combination trials had to spend up to 2 years to eternity to get companies to make their therapy available. And that's why through the Cancer Moonshot and the National Cancer Institute, we set up what we call a drug formulary. Each company puts its compound on the table, makes it available under prearranged intellectual property, access and licensing terms ahead of time. So they know if there's a combination that is found to work, what percentage they will get. The Cancer Moonshot also initiated a blood profiling atlas consortium, now being called the Blood Pack. Representatives from government, academia, and pharmaceutical and diagnostic companies launched a partnership to create an open database for liquid biopsies, blood draws, to accelerate development in safe and effective ways to detect and track cancer development and treatment from signals in the blood. But the Cancer Moonshot didn't just make an impact in the United States. You and many of your colleagues across the world answered the call of the Moonshot as well. In April 2016, I delivered remarks at the Conference on Regenerative Medicine hosted by the Vatican at the Pope address. There I laid out what I thought to be the following guideposts for international collaboration through the Moonshot. First, focus on prevention, access, affordability in every part of the world. In every part of the world. Two, the international response to cancer should reflect the same urgency we bring to infectious diseases. Cancer is a constant emergency on a path to take more than 10 million lives a year. But no, that sense of urgency does not exist like it did with infectious disease. Support standardization of data and biorepositories. I was stunned as a lawyer. I became a lawyer because I wasn't smart enough to become a doctor. I was amazed how little standards you have with regard to biosocial. But I really was. I was stunned. The tens of thousands of biopsies that are done that you're not at all sure are worth using because you're not sure how they were kept. There's no standard procedure. It's stunning. Increased government investment in cancer research to capitalize on this moment at this inflection point, which we did at home and you're doing as well. And increased data sharing among researchers, institutions, foundations, and nations. Through 2016, we had interest from many countries around the world, and together, I think we've begun to make some real progress. One, we launched the National Cancer Institute Genomic Data Commons at the University of Chicago to bring together cancer sequencing data and related patient information from the Cancer Genome Atlas, it was at NIH. That comprised roughly 14,000 individuals With international sharing agreements, we're now well over 30,000 individuals in that database. And to just make one obvious point, we can now do 1,000,000 billion calculations per second. 1,000,000 billion. Our Department of Energy will be able to do 1,000,000,000 billion calculations per second within the next 3 years. How many Nobel laureates sitting together for 10 years would it take to find patterns that could be found if we had an aggregated number that was consequential in just sequencing of cancer genomes? The United States signed memorandum of understanding with Australia, Canada, China, Germany, Japan, the Republic of Korea, Switzerland, and the American Institute in Taiwan to share proteogenomic data to advance research and find new answers for patients around the globe. The International Cancer Proteogenomic Consortium, which is now called, I hate these acronyms. I spent too much time in the intelligence community. ICPC. I don't know how the hell you even refer to it, but anyway. But it's a consortium. It combines proteomics with genomics to allow better insights into molecular signatures present in cancers. And today spans 12 countries, 31 institutions, and projects in 13 cancer types. Each institute has committed to the consortium data sharing pledge. And that pledge is simple: publicly releasing all the data to the research community. In addition to these data sharing collaborations, we announced as part of the Moonshot 3 new memorandum of understanding with Japan, Serbia, and Sweden, focused on advancing cancer research and care through greater collaboration. The National Cancer Institute is partnering with those countries to recommend areas of topics for joint workshops, develop collaborative research projects, review and clearance of collaborative projects, foster other joint activities to advance research on cancer. Under the Cancer Moonshot, the National Cancer Institute created a network of regional centers of research excellence that will partner with low and middle income countries to establish hubs to coordinate basic transnational clinical and population science research relevant to that region. The first set of 6 regional centers that we set up and this research excellence will be: 1, we form a large population-based breast cancer cohort in Vietnam. Secondly, to strengthen management of data for breast cancer and hypertension in Botswana and South Africa. Thirdly, we created a regional resource for cancer pathology and trauma surgery training in Malawi. Fourth, we developed an infrastructure to examine cancer and diabetes in Colombia, Costa Rica, Guatemala, and Mexico. And last, we built a pathology-based cancer registry to study breast, uterine, and cervical cancers in Bangladesh. And also established countrywide clinical-based method to prevent and control breast and oral cancers in India. And finally, the U.S. Department of State agreed to highlight and identify potential opportunities of cooperation in Cancer Moonshot in over 70 bilateral science and technology engagements they have around the world. And so in June of 2017, with input from and at the urging of several dozen experts, including Eric Lander of the Broad Institute at MIT, Elizabeth Jaffe from Johns Hopkins, and several experts from that first conversation in Davos, Nobel laureate and president of the Salk Institute, Dr. Elizabeth Blackburn and Dr. David Agus from the University of Southern California, we launched an organization, the Biden Cancer Initiative. And the reason we did that, I had no intention of doing that. But because the Moonshot was not taken up with the same fervor that existed when we were doing it, it was thought by 21 cancer heads of 21 cancer hospitals in America and 4 Nobel laureates and others that we should continue this project to maintain the urgency of now and keep pressure on trying to change the culture. I asked the head of the Broad Institute, why me? And it wasn't very flattering. He said, you do 2 things better than anybody else. One, you can get people together, and 2, you can shame people. I thought, what a hell of a reputation that is. But the initiative is focused on changing the way we do business in cancer research and development and providing cancer care by breaking down the silos and increasing collaboration. At the Biden Cancer Initiative, our focus is straightforward: to create a cancer care and research system that most people think we already have. Most people think we already have, and we already deserve. Think about it. I can go on my cell phone, which I gave to my staff, and find out what movie is playing in the single movie theater in Bemidji, Minnesota right now. And I can't tell you where a clinical trial is taking place on a particular cancer that I have a great interest in. Let that sink in for a second. How can that be? How can that be? That's why I've launched SWAT teams, working groups of experts from the advisory committee we have to attack the problems of data sharing and data standards, improve clinical trials and pediatric treatment development pipeline, to implement broader patient navigation and increase effective prevention and access to drugs and care. On September 21st this year, the Biden Cancer Summit at a venue in Washington, D.C., and at over 450 venues around the United States, in every single state, including Nigeria, Kenya, and Canada, we had the second of these fora. With this one, we celebrated the survivors and caregivers, the doctors and nurses, the researchers and scientists, by highlighting their stories and their courage. And I'll be very blunt with you. One of the reasons, Lord Darcy, you'll understand better than anyone, the only truly bipartisan thing that exists in America and around the world is the fight on cancer, no matter what your ideology. In my country, I believe if we said that we could solve the cancer problem by spending $100 billion, they would spend $100 billion. But we've got to communicate to the public what we know. We've got to communicate to the public that the money they're investing in their governments, through their governments, is working. It has an effect. That's the only thing I probably know better than any of you, being in this business for my entire adult life. If you convince people that we know what we're doing, that we're making progress, they will stay in the game and fund this research. Our call to action elicited more than 50 new actions and collaborations from organizations as diverse as AbbVie and Airbnb and WeWork and the Children's Brain Tumor Foundation. You can find all of them described in detail at bidencancer.org. But I want to take a couple of minutes just to describe a few things that have happened. There's an outfit called Alive and Kicking, the only organization in the United States focused on Lynch syndrome. It has a robust patient-driven registry to collect real-world and genomic data on Lynch syndrome patients globally. They announced the Mosaic Research Community, an online crowdsourcing approach to designing research studies for Lynch syndrome that brings together patients, families, supporters, and top Lynch syndrome researchers to develop new studies and to make progress on questions most important to patients. You all know, because you raised your hand, the person you know who had cancer, it was you. You get the diagnosis. Not only is that the worst diagnosis anyone can hear, cancer, in their minds, but after that, how do they navigate the system? It's complicated. It's frightening. How does mom with 2 kids, a single mom, get to her chemotherapy? How do they do these basic things? Cancer 101 in the Health Collaboratory are ensuring patients understand the data by launching what they call Health Untangled, a platform co-designed with patients to allow them to better understand key components of their health, such as laboratory values and genetics, using interactive visualization methodologies. People are scared. They want to have some sense of what this is all about, what's happening to them. Africa is facing a cancer crisis that is attributable largely to healthcare system inadequacies. In response, BioVentures for Global Health launched an African Access Initiative. Driven by Africa for Africans, this program engages pharmaceutical and biological companies, African governments and hospitals, and leading cancer centers to address the lack of access to quickly engage in a clinical trial, get clinical care that underlies the crisis. Aligning with self-defined healthcare needs in participating African countries and hospitals, AII announced that it's expanding access to cancer medicines and technologies by establishing affordable business and pricing agreements between companies and African governments. Strengthening healthcare infrastructure by coordinating placement of essential diagnostic equipment. Building clinical oncology capacity through fellowships and workshops. And fast-tracking patient access to innovative cancer therapies through clinical trials. All new. We were overwhelmed with the people and the institutions offering their help and ideas. But we can't claim victory until these solutions we are developing are standard, not the exception, until we have changed things we can't accept. And we can't accept disparities in outcomes by race, gender, and geography. We can't accept unaffordable treatments. We can't accept business as usual practice in research and care when there is nothing usual about a cancer diagnosis. We can't accept, as Lord Darcy wrote in his recent report, failing to adopt policies to address obesity, smoking, and alcohol consumption. Many people have said that the best way to predict the future is to create it. But Shakespeare said it best. It's not in the stars to hold our destiny, but in ourselves. This is within our capacity. I see the day when patients get the right therapy for the first time, allowing further therapies to work as opposed to preventing further therapies from being available. I can see the day when prevention is more effective and where care is personalized and more effective with less harmful side effects. I see the day when those of you in this room, when you take your children or grandchildren to school for their physical examination before they start, are vaccinated against certain cancers, like they can be vaccinated against HPV now. I see the day when we'll be able to identify through markers in the blood cancers that haven't even developed yet, or to catch cancer when it's most treatable by identifying early signals of cancer in the blood from biological fragments shed from cancer cells. And the one thing I can tell you is there is hope. There is hope for that day to come. You all know that. When President Kennedy described sending humankind to the moon, he talked about the commitment the nation was, quote, unwilling to postpone. Unwilling to postpone. And a full-blown, all-out coordinated effort against cancer should be a fight that we are unwilling to postpone. I'm confident there is the intellectual capacity. I've never seen folks who are as bright and work as hard as all of you. The last time I was exposed to people with this kind of intellectual capacity and dedication was when I was a young senator. I got elected when I was 29 years old, and I was put on the Foreign Relations Committee, which was unusual. And the only game in town then was, the only issue was nuclear arms control, nuclear issues. So at the suggestion of a scientist, I spent the better part of a year learning the rudimentary elements of how you make a nuclear weapon. And the reason I did that is I didn't want to stand on the floor of the Senate and have some senior member come up with a fact that was not particularly relevant, but I didn't understand whether it was accurate or not. So I knew more than they knew. So I knew what the PSI of SS-18 Soviet silo was. They didn't have SS-18s then. But I knew all that I had to know to be able to engage in the debate. They were brilliant. They taught me a lot. But you are the most talented community in the world. And my plea with you is, please break down the silos. Please continue to collaborate in ways that haven't existed before. Because we ought to be able to give the American public and the world public a cancer system they think already exists until they find out when they're diagnosed it doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. So thank you. Thank you for the honor of being able to speak before all of you, and I wish you all Godspeed. Your work is important. Thank you.
Mr. Vice President, it's my tremendous honor to carry out a British tradition of giving a vote of thanks after a marvelous and inspiring lecture. And I want to thank you, Vice President. We're inspired by your words, we're moved by your passion, and we're honored by your presence here today. Your global call to action is very compelling. And we have many of our leaders here today, as you say, and we will take that call to action forward. You have helped us today to launch a very important landmark collaboration between Imperial College London, the Institute for Cancer Research, and Cancer Research UK. And the leaders of those organizations are here, and this is a partnership that will really help us in the quest to win the battle against cancer. As you so visually pointed out, every one of us in this room has suffered the loss of a friend, a loved one, a family member. Everyone here is united in their determination to win the battle against cancer. Your phenomenal Cancer Moonshot, it was a marvelous day when President Obama turned to you and assigned you the Cancer Moonshot. And it's a marvelous metaphor for many of us in this room over a certain age. Remember that first moonshot.
You're not old enough.
And now, through your remarkable Biden Cancer Initiative, you are making a difference, and you are providing hope. Your work is propelling important progress in prevention, detection, diagnosis, treatment, and survival of cancer, as well as navigating the whole cancer process. And these are the very same areas that my colleagues here in the audience work on and are forging new ground. We're making discoveries that will change outcomes. As we know, cancer observes no borders and has devastating consequences throughout the world. We all need to use all our tools in our toolkit, as you say, and we need to unite our efforts across borders. As you also point out, we do our best work when we collaborate with one another and when we break down silos, and Imperial College London is particularly good at that. So I thank you, because the Biden Cancer Center is inspiring. It is such an inspiring initiative that resonates with us and really brings us together in unifying our fight against cancer. And together we will find new ways to prevail. We will carry the message you've given to us today forward. We will also carry the urgency to do so now. So I thank you again very much. I have a little token of our appreciation on behalf of Imperial College and all of our guests here today. And thank you again. Certainly.
All right.
It's another set of inspiring words.
It is. Thank you so very, very much. Thank you all. Appreciate it.